When we upgrade to an aftermarket car audio system, we need to use different devices to modify and adapt the signal that is coming from our source unit to our aftermarket amplifiers. JL Audio has a full line of car audio signal processors that gives us many different options to interface, correct, and tune the signal for our car audio system. But with all these different options, you may be wondering what is the best option for your application in order to get the best performance. In this video, we're going to look at the different features of each JL Audio processor and compare and contrast their features so that you can determine which is the best choice for your system. I'm Mark, welcome to CarAudioFabrication, the channel where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. A special thanks to JL Audio for sponsoring this video so that we can take a full in-depth look at all these different processors. Let's get started. So to get started understanding JL Audio's processor lineup, we have two different test setups that I'm going to be using to explain everything to you guys throughout the video. This setup here is a stock OEM system removed outside of the vehicle. You can see that we have a stock factory radio, and since this was taken out of a vehicle that had a factory premium system with a factory amplifier, it also has that stock amp. So this is simply just that OEM system outside of the vehicle, and I have all of the normal speaker wire connections that would normally be attached to speakers down here. Now over here we have an aftermarket car audio system. We've got the aftermarket head unit there along with some speakers attached. So we're going to start with the basics and then we'll move on to the more advanced. And the first device up here is the JL Audio LOC22. So this falls under the OEM integration category, and this is a fully active 2-channel speaker level to line level converter. In layman's terms, what that means is we can connect the speaker level connection into this line output converter, and we can convert it to a line level output that we can use for our aftermarket amplifiers. This can be used for both full range or low frequency applications. In other words, you could use it for a mids and highs amp or a subwoofer amp. Now this is an active line output converter, which means we need to connect a 12-volt positive constant lead along with a ground connection. But being a fully active line output converter does give us the design benefit of not altering bass response at high levels like many passive line output converters do. A quick side note, many of these features that I'm explaining in detail right now are carried throughout the whole line. That's why I want you guys to fully understand them. The next one of those common features is differential balanced inputs, and this really helps to avoid cable noise in the system. This LOC is capable of handling 40 volts RMS in, which is the equivalent of about 400 watts RMS at 4 ohms. On the back side of the converter here, they also have an input load switch. For many OEM systems, if you do disconnect a stock speaker, a lot of times it will automatically mute that channel. But if you're trying to use the signal for our aftermarket system, obviously we don't want that to happen, and this input load switch helps you avoid that. Something a little bit different about this LOC is there is no remote in turn on connection. Instead, this device monitors the inputs in order to determine when to turn on. And you have two different options for that turn on mode: DC offset and signal. This really helps simplify the installation since you only need that 12-volt positive constant and a ground connection. It monitors the signal to know when to turn on, and then it even has a remote out connection. So you can use this to turn on downstream amplifiers or activate a relay. Now for the output where we're sending signal out of this device to our downstream amplifiers or other devices, we want to make sure that we're not clipping that signal. In order to set that output level correctly, they've even included a clipping detection light. Now the LOC22 can give us up to 8 volts RMS of signal out, so a really nice, strong, clean signal. And one of my favorite features as somebody that likes to custom build things, you're gonna see this carried throughout the line. All of these devices have many different mounting holes that we can use. The LOC22 has a ton of great features, but there are some downsides that might make one of the other devices a better choice for our application. Understand that with the LOC22, we can't control crossovers, time alignment, or equalization. As an example, let's say we were using this to send signal to a subwoofer amplifier. On this stock system here, it has a stock subwoofer output, so I can convert that speaker level output and use it for my subwoofer amp. But what if I was doing a mids and highs amplifier? On this particular stock system, since it breaks out all the different mids and highs to several different active channels, like Like in the front here, it has a tweeter output along with a mid-range output. There is no way with this device for us to sum those different signals together and use them for a full range amplifier. Now your factory car audio system might be different. You might have a speaker connection that has a full range of signal that you could use for that full range amp, and that's why this is all situation dependent. Something that is very common on stock car audio systems is they will have EQ or equalization applied to each of the different speaker outputs. This EQ is built into the factory system from the factory. They do it in order to optimize the performance of their stock speakers. But obviously, if we are replacing those factory speakers and upgrading to an aftermarket car audio system, we're going to want to fix that signal, and that's where the fix products start to come into play. This is the TwK-D8, and this is an OEM integration DSP with automatic time correction and digital EQ. So with the TwK-D8, we are still using a stock car audio system to bring signal into this device with the goal of converting it to a line level signal that we can use for aftermarket amplifiers, but this adds in that automatic time correction and automatic digital EQ. Now with the TwK-D8, we're going to see many of the same features that we saw on the LOC22. This is an active device, meaning we have to give it that 12 volt positive constant and ground. This has the differential balanced inputs, this time up to 30 volts RMS coming in. This has different turn on options, but this time they do add the option for a remote lead to turn this on. If we did want to use a switched 12 volt source, we don't have to because we could use the signal or the DC offset turn on mode. This still gives us the remote out connection that we can use to turn on other devices, amplifiers, or a relay. And again, there's those awesome multiple mounting holes. I'm going to mount the connectors on the sides here just so you can see those, but now with the TwK-D8, we do have some additions over the LOC22. First off, rather than just 2 channels of input for left and right, we have now 8 channels of input. Remember how I explained before with some complex stock systems, a lot of times they will break the signal out. In this case, we have a tweeter signal and a mid-range signal. We might want to sum those for a full range signal output coming out. And since we have all these inputs now we can do so. Next up on this device, we now have a USB port that we can use, and that's so that we can connect to the TwK-D8 with a computer. More on this later. With the JLID port, we can add an optional controller like the DRC205 or the DRC100. This allows remote control of the device, and we can change settings via a click. Also on top is a button to do the calibration process. Now that button is intentionally recessed down in so that you don't accidentally click it. To activate it, you can use something like a small Allen key. The calibration process for fixing the audio signal is very easy to do. First off, you're going to disconnect the audio outputs. You'll set your factory system to 3/4 volume or the max unclipped volume if you are able to measure it, and you'll want to make sure you disable all the tone settings like bass or treble. You're going to play the calibration track on the included CD, and if you don't have a CD player, which is becoming more and more common on factory car audio systems nowadays, you can get a downloadable file from JL Audio's website. Once that file or track is playing, you're simply going to hold the calibrate button for 5 seconds, and then the fix is going to do its thing and correct that audio signal. Once the calibration process is complete, these status lights will tell you if the calibration was successful, and these lights also give us information for whether or not the power is on without a signal, if there is a signal present, and this even does also again have that input clipping detection. Now you might have noticed this earlier, an additional connection here is the Valet in connection. We can use this connection to trigger a Valet mode, and we can set up what this does in the software. We can make the Valet mode automatically turn on a high pass filter, which basically removes all that bass signal that's coming out of the TwK-D8. This is nice because we're essentially turning off our subwoofers so that somebody can't abuse them. With the Valet mode, we could also attenuate the signal 15 dB so the system can't be overdriven or again, abused. Now notice on the output side here, we have a left and right output, so basically a 2-channel analog output, or we have the option to use the optical digital output. So again, it's essentially a 2-channel output of left and right, but this time a digital signal. So the Fix82 allows us to correct the time delay and equalization of our factory car audio system. But it's really important to understand that it's correcting the electrical signal that is going to our aftermarket amplifiers. The reason that's important to understand is this device is not meant to be a powerful system tuning device when it comes to tuning the audio signal. There is some tuning flexibility built into the Fix82. We can control a 10-band graphic EQ on the left and right channels, but to get more tuning flexibility, we will need to be using the TwK devices that we will talk about in a minute. Or we can use the DSP functionality built into JL Audio's VXI amplifier lineup. The other thing worth noting here with the Fix82 is we only have that single left-right output. Understand that even though we only have 2 channels of output coming out of that device, that doesn't mean that we can only have 2 speakers or 2 channels of amplifier power. We could spread out those 2 channels amongst multiple amplifiers and have as many channels as we want. But a feature that it does affect is if on your factory system, if you want to retain that front to rear fade, you wouldn't be able to do so with only 2 channels of output. If you want to control that front rear fade at the factory system, you would need to have 4 channels of output, and that's where the next device comes up. This is the Fix86, another OEM integration DSP from JL Audio. In terms of input connections, power connections, and operation, the Fix86 is nearly identical to the Fix82. The main difference here, though, is to solve that issue that I just mentioned of being able to retain that factory fade control. And that is with the addition of more outputs. As an example, let's take a look at our inputs. Let's say that we have the front mids on channels 1 and 2, and we could sum in the factory tweeters on channels 3 and 4, and then sum in the subwoofer signal on channels 7 and 8. With those connections, we could create a full range signal for our front outputs. We could have the rear speakers connected to channels 5 and 6 for the rear inputs, and we could have that signal summed with the subwoofer for our rear outputs. So now, rather than just having that 2 channels of output like we do on the Fix82, we have those multiple channels of output, and when we do that factory fade control on our factory system, we're going to be able to fade the signal from front to back. A quick side note, in the software for the Fix86, we can turn on high-pass filters for the front and rear outputs, and we can also turn on a low-pass filter for the subwoofer output. So again, the Fix86 fixes our signal, it corrects that factory time delay and factory equalization, and again, we can do some very minor equalization, this time for 4 total channels. Otherwise, everything else is the same with the exception of the Fix86 not having a digital output. So we know the Fix devices correct the OEM signal, but even though the OEM electrical signal is now flat, for the most tuning flexibility, we will want to add a system tuning DSP or a DSP built-in amplifier. But in this video, we're focusing on JL Audio's processors, so let's talk about these, the TwK. So JL Audio calls these their system tuning DSPs, and in this case, we have the TwK-88 and the TwK-D8. Notice that in the packaging for these is an included DRC200 controller. This is a dual knob controller, so for example, you could use it to set up something like subwoofer level independently from master volume control, and you can also click it in to change presets. Oftentimes you're going to mount the controller in the front of the vehicle and the device in the rear of the vehicle, so you get an extension wire for doing so. And you also get a USB extension wire because for these devices, you're going to need to connect to a computer, which is required for setup. As far as power connections go, both of the TwK devices have the same connections we've seen before. Constant power, ground, a switched 12-volt remote turn-on connection, a remote output connection, and that valet connection. But notice, unlike the Fix, these do not have options for a turn-on mode. And that's because these are not meant to be an OEM integration DSP. These are, again, meant to be a system tuning DSP. So in order to bring audio signal into these, you're going to use something like an aftermarket head unit, or potentially even use a TwK device in combination with a Fix device, which has already corrected the OEM audio signal and send that corrected fixed signal into the TwK. Let's focus on the similarities between these two TwK devices first. First off, these both have a USB connection so that we can connect to these with the JL Audio Tune software. And now we have a ton of flexibility. We can completely map our inputs and outputs. We can control equalization on each channel with a 10-band parametric EQ. We can add crossovers, we can add time delay, and now with the latest update to the Tune software, we can use measurement functions on these to really perfect the performance. I strongly recommend you guys go watch my tuning video where I explain all of the functionality of using this program and go through a full system tune. I'll link it for you guys to watch down below. Now, if we look at the output side of the TwK devices, each of these have 8 channels of output. So tons of flexibility here to control multiple channels for a larger system. Now notice that these both also have a digital input along with a digital output. The optical digital output is a pass-through output on both of these, which means we cannot control that output. But it is possible for us to choose which of the inputs we want to use to feed signal to it. The advantage of having that pass-through optical digital output is if we did have a system application where we wanted more than 8 channels of output, we could link multiple devices together and have that same incoming signal. The main difference between the TwK-88 and the TwK-D8 is over here on the input side. On the TwK-D8, you'll notice that we only have a single left-right digital input. So you would never ever want to pair the D8 with the FX86, and that's because the FX86 only has analog outputs. There would be no way to send signal from this to the D8. What you would potentially want to pair the D8 with is the FX82, and that's because the FX82 has that digital output. With the D8, you could also use an aftermarket head unit if that head unit has digital output. So the D8 pairs really well with the FX82, but you might be thinking, Mark, earlier you mentioned that I wouldn't be able to retain my front to rear fade if I used the FX82. But if you do pair this with the D8, there is a way that you can retain that. You can set up the DRC control knobs so that they control the fade rather than a volume. And remember that this is 2 knobs that are independent of each other, so you have a lot of flexibility with what you could set up to do. I just want to point that out because although you wouldn't be able to control the fade on the factory screen, you still can retain it on our knob here, and we would be able to use an integration DSP like the FX82 to correct the signal, and then we can do all of our tuning either on a TwK device that sends signal to aftermarket amplifiers or a VXI amplifier we could use to do all the tuning for the audio signal internally in this to send out that signal to each of the speakers. So that's the TwK-D8. Now on the TwK-88, we have 8 channels of analog inputs along with a coaxial digital input. The benefit of having these 8 channels of input is more flexibility in system design. We can now do things like use the FX86 and retain that factory fade function. Something else really cool we could do is we could have our factory audio system signal coming in on one set of inputs, and then on another set of inputs we could use something like a high-res player. And then we could switch between those different inputs by switching between different presets using our control knob. It is worth noting that for the TwK-88, it's not these 8 inputs plus these 2 inputs. If we use either of these 2 inputs, they basically take the place of the analog inputs 1 and 2. On top of the device, they again have signal status lights, which allow us to determine if we have a signal present coming into the device, along with showing us if there is clipping on the signals. But also notice they've given us the ability to switch between presets by clicking that little recessed button inside there, which is advantageous if we weren't planning on adding the controller. As you can tell, there is a ton of flexibility for getting a signal for your aftermarket car audio system using the JL Audio processing gear. Whether it's a simple subwoofer amplifier upgrade or a fully tuned factory integration, there is a device or pair of devices in this line that will allow you to achieve awesome performance. I mentioned it earlier in the video, but I definitely recommend that you guys go on over and check out my full tuning video I did where I went through a full digital signal processor tune and documented every step of the process. Also, if you'd like to learn more about JL Audio, I recently did a factory tour video at their Miramar, Florida headquarters location. Definitely check that out as well. And if you guys want to learn more about the full JL Audio lineup, check out those links down in the video description. Again, a thanks to JL Audio for sponsoring this video, and thank you guys for tuning in and watching.